Peace be upon you. Dear viewers, we're still on our Women in Depth journey. We've now arrived at the education station. Let's review the history of modern school education, which is the foundation for university education. But why are we changing the topic away from women? It's not a change, we're just laying the groundwork to see if modern education equips a girl to become a woman of the future. Does it help her perform the roles she was created for? Does it benefit her and provide her with serenity and happiness in this life and the next? Today's episode is about education in general, men and women, young kids and teenagers. We'll review the features of learning and education in Islam, stemming from Revelation, and keep them in mind as guidelines as we discuss the development of modern school education and its worldwide spread, including in the Muslim world. We have the right to know what brought us to these classrooms, in which we spend 12 to 14 years of our young lives, the most critical stage in forming our characters. We have the right to wonder, what role did the schools play in producing the corrupt doctor, cheating engineer, thieving merchant, embezzling official, skeptic physicist, atheist biologist, feminist doctor, and others? The first verse that Allah revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, is, read in the name of your Lord who created. Quran translated meaning 96:1. O mankind, read and learn about the universe and life, and perceive them in the name of your Lord, based on your belief in him as a Lord who educates you. He created you from a clinging clot, guided you to acquiring and sharing knowledge by the pen, and granted you an innate nature and a mind, capable of recognizing truths, as it's created by a perfect Lord. It's not a mind that came by random chance, but a mind prepared by the most gracious Creator, who wants man to learn what he doesn't know. Read to benefit yourself and others with knowledge, and use knowledge to deduce the greatness of Allah, thank him, and achieve the purpose you were created for, servitude, in its comprehensive sense to attain virtue in life and beyond. A universal vision that harmonizes soul, spirit, emotions, and mind, so that all abilities are directed toward achieving the ultimate goal. A vision that stems from belief in the oneness of Allah, to produce a monotheistic soul, and concentrated perception, not disoriented or fragmented. Driven by this vision, Muslims made huge contributions to all forms of ilm, knowledge. The Journey of Certainty lists many sources that acknowledge the Islamic roots for many sciences and inventions, including the experimental method itself. This is acknowledged even by unbiased Westerners. The Islamic education system has safeguards against corruption. First, education is servitude to Allah, whether it is in Sharia or natural sciences. Thus the culture, read in the name of your Lord, was widespread in society, in families, in Quranic schools, by educators, mosques, education circles, and in schools founded in the Islamic eras. This leads us to the second safeguard, the shared responsibility. Everyone shares the responsibility of education. It doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of the state. Shared responsibility immunizes against the spread of corruption, even when the governing body is corrupt, because society is founded on. All of you are guardians, responsible for your subjects. Bukhari. Thus, every pious guardian strives to minimize the damage to those under his care, even when leaders are corrupt, and parents and educators continue teaching in servitude to Allah. This protects the roots of Muslim society, even when the branches become corrupt, as healthy branches can regrow from the protected roots. Third, the authenticity and permanence of the reference. Read in the name of your Lord. QTM 96:1. Revelation is the reference, so the values and standards of ilm remain unchanged. Based on revelation, the state provides the necessary environment to spread true knowledge, empower qualified individuals, and protect people from the peddlers of ignorance and misguidance. Because protecting the mind is one of the 5 imperatives of Sharia, the state sets boundaries, then flexibility within these boundaries, and the ruler's accountability is regulated by revelation. There is a reference, the reference of revelation, which no ruler can alter in any way. Rather, the ruler is required to attend to people's affairs based on this reference. If the ruler violates it and commands teaching something that goes against public welfare, then there is no obedience to any human. being if it involves disobedience of Allah, Ahmed, he must be stopped and forced to submit to revelation, as his authority is not absolute. Rather, if you disagree over anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. Qtm 459. Fourth, Islam instructs that wealth should be distributed fairly in society, not stolen or controlled by a ruling circle or group of capitalists. Islam fights the concentration of wealth in the hands of a select few, so that wealth should not circulate only among those of you who are rich. Qtm 59:7. Giving people financial security and independence means that students and people of knowledge in all areas can speak freely, as they are not threatened in their livelihood. Their salary doesn't come from a ruling group that can withhold it if they refuse to submit to its whims. This free environment enabled Islamic charity endowments to play a great role in education, with wealthy Muslims allocating money as an ongoing charity after death to fund students who devote themselves to the pursuit of knowledge. This helped social institutions retain their power and role in developing scholars in various fields, even in times of regime deterioration. For example, Al-Azhar, before it was corrupted by British colonialism, was funded by endowments. The fair distribution of wealth prevents education from becoming a tool in the hands of a pack of tycoons. Instead, the concept of servitude in education is present in full force. The goal is for the Ummah to achieve servitude to Allah in its comprehensive sense, as we discussed. This takes us to the fifth feature of Islamic education. The output of education is not measured by the qualification of individuals to serve investors and multinational corporations, i.e. slavery in disguise, but by the achievement of Quranic objectives, the welfare of people in this life and the hereafter, and the righteousness of their souls, spirits, and morals. Thus, the Islamic scholar is valued and the mother is valued, even though they have no value in the capitalist system, as they don't serve materialism. This sets the scene for the empowerment of Muslims, the emergence of Muslim influencers, and the production of generations of free people who studied in society's distinguished education centers, and whose financial security is assured by society's economy centers. Their sole criteria for accepting or rejecting what they are asked to do is it right or wrong? They are not taught servitude to other than Allah, nor are they threatened in their livelihood. So, 1. Education is in the name of Allah. 2. It's an act of worship by everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility. 3. Revelation is the source for existential truths, the driving force for ILM, and a permanent constant reference that never changes. 4. Education that harmonizes the components of humanity, with a goal is to achieve servitude to Allah in its comprehensive sense. 5. Education supported by a just economic system, not a monopoly, by a privileged few, with safeguards against the deviations and corrupt ideologies imposed by unjust tyrants on generations. What was happening in Europe during that time? It's important for us to know, because a completely different model of education was being formed. When our attachment to revelation weakened, the European occupiers were able to dismantle our Islamic education system, destroy its strengths and remove its safeguards, and replace it with their system, but with a systematic distortion to keep us as followers who always lag behind. Europe had a feudal class system, masters and workers. Education was limited to the aristocrats. If the workers were taught anything, it was only to increase their productivity for the masters. Then, during the Renaissance in Italy, 1400 to 1600 AD, a revolution against old authorities took place. Countries with citizens were formed instead of masters and workers. People were given a brief respite, until another class system slowly emerged, capitalism. Before, education was restricted to a specific class, but under capitalism, the most economically feasible solution to provide free education for Europeans was to establish formal schools, whose goal was state indoctrination of generations and increasing the productivity of the working class. To empower the state, power factories, and control colonized countries that they invade to rob their resources. To this end, the so-called factory model school was established to create a submissive human being fashioned for factory work. The first of these schools appeared in Prussia, Germany, in 1717. You can read more about this school model by researching the Prussian education model. The second half of the 18th century saw the first industrial revolution. Women were taken out of their homes and given contraceptive pills to increase their work time in factories. In 1807, schools in Prussia were compelled to submit to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and teach whatever the state dictated. The German philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte, in his book, The General Nature of the New Education, says, "The schools must fashion the person, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will." This is at a time when Germany was at war with France and losing heavily. Fichte believed that the gravest error leading to the poor upbringing of Germans was the student's free will, because it leads a person to hesitate between good and evil. In contrast, a good upbringing should be based on eliminating free will, since the goal is for students to be fashioned to empower the state. Thus, in morning assemblies, students stood in lines like military formations and performed mandatory rituals to sanctify the state. About a quarter of a century later, in 1830, the German Friedrich Froebel established the first kindergarten because his father had remarried after his mother's death, and he lived a miserable childhood, neglected by both his father and stepmother. Around this time, in 1835, while India was under the British colonization following the Muslim rule, the British historian and politician Thomas Macaulay presented a report to the British ruler in India titled Minute on Indian Education. It stated, "We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons Indians in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science, borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population." There you have it. The goal of establishing schools and colonies is maintaining the intellectual occupation of a country, even after the military occupation is over. Keep in mind this precise description by Thomas Macaulay as we talk about the current international schools in Muslim countries. During all these developments, much ilm was transferred from Muslims to Europe, after severing it from its religious origins. From the roots of "Read in the name of your Lord," the new slogan became "Read in the name of the state and its power," which in reality was "Read in the name of the human, his desires, and his tyranny." In 1843, the concept of factory schools moved from Prussia to America and Europe. Then, between 1852 and 1917, compulsory education and public schools were adopted in the American states, starting with Massachusetts and ending with Mississippi. In 1892, in America, the Committee of 10, consisting of 10 people, decided to shape school education in the way it is today. 12 years that include teaching the Greek curriculum modified with the modern English language, science, and history. This 12-year system is still in use worldwide. We have a right to ask, when this system, developed by the 10, was copied over to the Islamic world, did anyone ask, who are they? What is their reference? Why should we adopt what they adopted? What goals were they trying to achieve when they set up this education system? To answer these questions, we revisited the biography of a prominent member of the Committee of 10, William T. Harris, the U.S. Commissioner of Education. He submitted a dissertation titled Indian Education on Indigenous Indians, the original inhabitants of America. We read the original document of his dissertation. As a historical background, America's original inhabitants are the American Indians. When Europeans invaded, they carried out genocides, killing millions of American Indians. A bloody history covered in another episode. Even after Europeans were relatively settled, conflict continued with the remaining indigenous American tribes. In this report, Harris, Commissioner of Education, and General Thomas Morgan, man of war, put forth a solution to dissolve the new generation of American Indians into the new American civilization, so that they no longer form a threat to the invaders, who became the legitimate residents of America. The ideal solution suggested by the authors was to impose a radical system of education by taking control of the Indians at an early age, secluding them as much as possible from tribal life, and subjecting them to compulsory en masse education. Harris says, 1 year or 2 years or even 3 years of school education is not so economical as 5 years or 10 years of school training, because the short period of school training will make little impression on the form of tribal life. It will not form a society founded on productive industry. Our civilization must protect itself from the dangers of that lower form of civilization by supporting military forces with a continual, heavy expense, or, on the other hand, the cruel policy of extermination. So, Harris suggested the Christian missionary approach in dealing with the Indians, i.e. imposing compulsory education and taking them away from their families for up to 10 years, as a means for civilized integration. This is William Harris, one of the top 10 who founded today's global educational system, sending children to schools from an early age and keeping them there for extended periods. The main goal is to weaken the power of the tribe and the parents' influence and impose state policy on them. If societies achieve these goals peacefully, then well and good. If not, this model will be shamelessly enforced, like what's happening in China nowadays with the Uyghur Muslim children separated from their families, raised by the communist state, and stripped off their religion and history, so that they become docile human robots, like other Chinese citizens. Harris admitted that people were fashioned through the school education system. In his book, The Philosophy of Education, he says, 99 out of 100 people in every civilized nation are automata, careful to walk in the prescribed path, careful to follow prescribed custom. This isn't a coincidence. This is the result of substantial education, which, scientifically defined, is the subsumption of the individual under his species. He went on to suggest treatments for this fashioning. Some might say, who cares about Harris and Fichte? This is all in the past. The West now values freedom of thought. This molding and stripping of free will is a thing of the past. Thing of the past. What about the molding and brainwashing that students are subjected to nowadays on the issue of homosexuality, for example, after their brains and wills were molded to accept adultery as personal freedom? If it's justifiable to strip away students' free will, as Fichte wants, and blend them culturally and dictate their values, as Harris wants, all in the name of reinforcing the state, and there isn't an authentic reference from Revelation to govern values, then values will change with the change in times. Accepting homosexuality, for example, is now a civilized value that students must be molded and brainwashed to accept, when, previously, it was completely unacceptable. Compare this to the correct Islamic scenario where revelation is the scale and reference that never changes or alters with time, where read in the name of your Lord. Quran translated meaning 96:1 is everyone's motto. In a society where children are protected from the whims and subversions of a ruling minority. Up until 1954, black children in the U.S. were not allowed to share the same classrooms with white children. When the Supreme Court mandated integrated schooling, many whites were enraged and protested with banners reading, "Stop race mixing is communism." When the little black girl Ruby Bridges entered her classroom, white parents objected and pulled their children out of school, leaving her alone in her classroom. Ruby is still living. Just imagine, we're adopting this system as a basis for school education without much filtering. We're following a system that, until recently, practiced blatant discrimination based on skin color, while we're the ummah of the most noble of you, in the sight of Allah, is the most righteous of you. QTM 49:13. Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, said, Abu Bakr is our chief, and he manumitted our chief, meaning Bilal, who was a black Abyssinian, Bukhari. One might say, you only list the cons of this education system, not its pros. This is biased. Our goal here, dear viewers, isn't to review the academic history and cover all details of the topic, but to focus on the points where this education system differs significantly from the concept of education and learning in Islam, and to highlight the ruinous effects the world is suffering from as a result. We aren't the only ones to criticize this system and its outcomes. Some Westerners have also raised objections. In 1983, the U.S. National Commission on Excellence in Education submitted a report to the American nation and the Department of Education titled A Nation at Risk, The Imperative for Educational Reform. Its author, James Harvey, said, "The educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. Was the education system actually reformed after that? Perhaps the answer is in John Gatto's book, published 8 years later in 1991. Based on his long teaching experience, Gatto wrote the book, Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling, to criticize the academic curricula in American schools. The book spread widely and a second edition was published in 2002. Here are some abstracts from the book, so that you can realize the magnitude of the crisis. Schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet, Earth. No one believes anymore that scientists are trained in science classes, or politicians in civics classes, or poets in English classes, meaning that schools were not a factor in people's success in these areas. Gatto further says, the truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders. Fashioning, as we discussed. He continues, the institution is psychopathic. It has no conscience. It rings a bell, and the young man in the middle of writing a poem must close his notebook and move to a different cell, where he must memorize that humans and monkeys derive from a common ancestor. Thus, students learn contradicting information. In literature and language classes, they see their unique human abilities that distinguish them from animals. Then in science class they have to memorize that these lowly animals are siblings from a common grandfather. This lack of a unified vision based on authentic revelation results in a disconnection between the various components of a human and his consciousness. The polarity of the different subjects is the norm in school curricula across the globe, especially in schools that play on public emotion by including religious subjects, while dictating to students the agenda of the state and pseudoscience fabrications about the universe and life. In his book, John Gatto also says, no large-scale reform is ever going to work to repair our damaged children and our damaged society until we force open the idea of school to include family as the main engine of education. So, every guardian is responsible for the education of his charge. On education in general, he says, it should make you spiritually rich. It should teach you what is important, how to live and how to die. This is something the school system doesn't teach, as it cares more about material aspects than human ones. Even from a purely materialistic production perspective, is this education system successful? Criticism is strong regarding its shortcomings even in this regard. In 2006, the international advisor, Sir Ken Robinson, who was knighted in appreciation of his services in education, gave a TED Talk with the highest number of views in the history of the program, more than 70 million thus far, titled, Do Schools Kill Creativity? In it, he criticizes the school education system that produces students terrified of making mistakes, thus killing their courage and creativity, and ignores children's need to move and play. Furthermore, the rigid hierarchical structure of school subjects does not explore talents, but squanders them. Robinson says, our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mine the earth for a particular commodity. If not found, the student might be labeled as sick, while he may be gifted in areas other than those mined by the school. In his talk, The Failure of Success, Dr. George Land told the audience how the U.S. Space Agency, NASA, had asked him and his colleague Beth Jarman for a test to examine its employees' creativity. He and his colleague developed the test, then decided to test it on children. They found that the more children learn at school, the more their original creativity is destroyed. In 2013, Robinson gave another TED Talk, How to Escape Education's Death Valley. Some might say, how can they accuse the education system of killing talent when we're witnessing great advances in inventions and discoveries? We say, Allah endowed humans with significant abilities. Today's discoveries are the result of accumulated knowledge, with major contributions by Muslims across many centuries. Thus, the advance in discoveries isn't testimony for the success of the school education system. The book, Cradles of Eminence, published in 1962, studied the childhood of more than 400 influential personalities of the 20th century and found that 3 out of 5, i.e. 60%, were not satisfied with schools or teachers. For your information, Thomas Edison was described by his teacher as a misfit, unfit for school education. Edison didn't finish his schooling. He left after elementary school. And this misfit went on to become one of the greatest inventors in modern times, with 1,093 U.S. patents under his name. Albert Einstein's Greek teacher pronounced him intellectually hopeless, adding that Einstein should leave school immediately and stop wasting everyone's time. I wonder how many talents across the globe were buried by the school education systems. Incompetence in exploring and nurturing talents. There have been some attempts to escape traditional schooling, such as the Waldorf schools, which avoid using technology and focus on cultivating talents. A number of Silicon Valley employees enroll their children there. The founder of these schools is Rudolf Steiner, who was influenced by Eastern philosophy. So, it's no surprise that the nursery schedule includes a song at snack time, where students thank the sun, the earth, and the water for the food they eat. This happens even here in Muslim countries. May Allah be pleased with Ibn Taymiyyah, who said, in his book, Iqtida al-Sirat al-Mustaqim, in explaining the wisdom of Allah's command, not to follow the disbelievers. It is enough that corruption at the roots must corrupt the branches. Whoever notices this may know some of Allah's wisdom. He who is sick at heart may have doubts about not following them, because he can't see the benefits. The truth is that all actions and affairs of a disbeliever must have a flaw that prevents him from reaping their benefit. If any of his actions were righteous and complete, then he would have deserved their reward in the afterlife. But all his affairs are either corrupt or incomplete. Here, a Muslim may express surprise. Why do Allah and His Messenger, peace and blessing be upon him, command us not to imitate the disbelievers? We aren't talking about benefiting from their discoveries, but about imitating their education methods that are based on their perceptions of the universe and life. Imitating them in these aspects may result in distortions that aren't apparent to all, as their affairs are either corrupt or incomplete. Muslims should develop their own methods of education, using revelation as a reference. One of the attempts to escape the prevalent school education system was presented by Salman Khan, a Bengali American, with high qualifications and a simple explanation style. He criticized the education system in a TED Talk, and in his interview, The History of Education. We've used both as references. Salman Khan established a free, international education platform that teaches many sciences in a style that considers individual differences in comprehension. It allows students to watch topics they want to study and replay topics they didn't understand with simplified explanations. As soon as his platform became popular, it was contained by the sharks of capitalism, including Google and Bill Gates, who invested in it heavily. As expected, the funding served the sponsors' intellectual and moral agendas. On the 50th anniversary of the LGBTQ Pride tradition, celebrated by Google and Microsoft, Khan Academy danced to the same tune by promoting LGBTQ people on Instagram. CBN News reported how the platform pushes this agenda in children's lessons. In English, for example, a blank space is left when the discussion involves two women, for the student to choose the linguistically correct answer, i.e., her wife. So, each woman went to lunch with her wife. Another form of indoctrination involves brainwashing the children into accepting the values dictated by capitalist sharks. Last year, the Academy again celebrated LGBTQ Pride by coloring their Twitter logo with the rainbow flag. As long as change remains confined to style and form, and stays away from motives, goals, and reference, the desired reform will not happen. As long as countries remain unconcerned about teaching students what benefits their faith and life, and their focus remains on indoctrination, molding, instilling state values in children, and teaching them obedience. As in Ayman Abdul Rahim's lecture, Society Without Schools, the desired reform will not happen. International programs such as IG, SAT, and IB emerged, but they all maintained the following common features. Among all forms of education mentioned today: 1. The separation between knowledge and revelation. 2. Blocking the natural path, from knowledge to the Creator. 3. The absence of servitude to Allah in the quest for knowledge. 4. Molding and indoctrination in the values derived from the ever-changing agendas of capitalists and power brokers. 5. Continuously shifting values. 6. Measuring education's output by grades and marketability, not by the student's integrity and ability to achieve servitude to Allah in its comprehensive sense. 6. The separation and contradiction between the different fields of knowledge in many curricula, such that what students learn in biology contradicts with what they learn in religion. On the origins of the universe and life, for example. What is the alternative then? What education do we want? What are its pillars? What's the woman's role in all of this? To influence or be influenced? This is what we will discuss next episode, Allah willing. It is important to mention that much of the information in this episode comes from the compilations of Brother Dr. Abdul Rahman Zakir, a psychology and education therapist who's interested in studying the soul and education. I also benefited from a discussion with Brother Professor Anis Sheikh Kram, a specialist in Sharia and educational psychology, as well as the efforts of other brothers and sisters who helped me investigate and research information for today's episode. May Allah reward them all. Peace and mercy of Allah be upon you all.